Molweni, and welcome to it right here on CTV. Remember, you are watching Conversations with Africa Unite, the show from Africa to Africans. I am your host, Lelethu, and obviously you will be seeing more of this pretty face in the coming weeks because every single week we will be right here giving you the lowdown on some of the most important topics on migration, from the xenophobia to all the intricate details, including the terminologies on migration. We are here discussing all of that. And today we are delving into such an important topic that is usually ignored, and that is migrant young people, migrant youth. We're looking into some of the challenges that they face when they come into the country. And to help us unpack all of this, we have in studio Mrs. Basetsane Mosia. She's actually one of my colleagues, and she heads the movement building program at Africa Unite. She is the project officer, and she will be giving us some of the experiences that migrant young people face and some of the challenges and how they overcome it and what they do and as an organization to help curb some of these issues. I'll let her tell you more about some of the work that she does. But in the meantime, please do not forget to join in on our social media conversations. On Instagram, we are official_Africa Unite. On Twitter, we are Africa_Unite, Africa_ZA, excuse that. And on Facebook, we are Africa Unite. Thank you so much, Base, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. Now, before we start off everything, I want to know, so you work as part of the movement building program at Africa Unite. What does the program do, and what is the focus on young people? Why does it have to do with migrant young people? What's the history behind that?
Okay, so thank you for that question. I work, as you've mentioned, as the Movement Building Project Officer. And Movement Building is a program that seeks to capacitate migrant youth and women living in South Africa. But we want to have them be actively mobilized in order to speak on the challenges that are faced with in their country that they're in.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. And so having then worked with the migrant young people, what would you say are the most common challenges that you come across with all the young people that you work with?
I think the most common challenge and the most apparent one is the issue of documentation. And it's a very serious challenge because it trickles down into every other facet of their lives. Because if you don't have documentation living in a country, you cannot apply to school, you cannot apply for a job. So a lot of young people, a lot of young migrants living in South Africa have this issue with accessing or getting the right documentation that is required. And as a result, they face a lot of other challenges as they move on in their lives in the host country.
And I think a lot, and that's a common trait I've noticed, that with all the people that we've had in studio talk about the issues and the challenges that they've been facing, that's one of the most common, challenges that comes up, the documentation. But I just want to understand, Basa, in terms of then the documentation, what challenges does that lead to? Like you said, that it leads to a lot of other challenges that end up being a part of that situation. So what are some of the challenges then does the lack of documentation bring about?
Right. I think the greatest one, especially with migrant youth, is access to tertiary education, because a lot of them will finish their primary school and high school education, and then when they want to now apply for university, it's a whole different ball game. Because for one, they have issues even living in South Africa, applying for universities in South Africa, because they are termed or identified as international students by virtue of their ID number. So that challenge then now becomes them not being able to access tertiary education. And as a result, also then they're forced to, find a job. And even then, you can't get employed if you don't have the papers. So then that becomes another whole ball game where they end up being exploited even if they do get jobs, because then they don't have the correct papers, and so they end up settling for anything that anyone will offer them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the tertiary education, is it the application that's usually the problem, or is it the funding?
So it's both the application and funding. So application in the sense that obviously your ID number, and then they see it that, okay, it's not a South African ID number, so then you're automatically an international student.
Yeah.
And I think funding in a sense that when you're an international student, the funds are different as to a local citizen.
Yes.
So then a lot of these migrant youth, their parents also are in precarious work. So they don't have proper paying jobs that they can afford to send their children into university. So there's also that issue of funding in that regard where they cannot finance. But I think another challenge is even bursaries that are available, readily available to migrant youth.
Yeah.
There is a lack of that. And I think that's what we want to do ultimately with the work that we do at Africa Unite, is to avail these resources, but also the information, share this information widely to a lot of migrant youth to say, listen, there is a scholarship that's available to a migrant youth specifically. Please apply and you may get in.
You know, one of the things that I've heard mostly is that there's different policies in different institutions as well in terms of registration. So you'll get a migrant, for instance, who got into, you know, this institution and has done very well in their matric. They managed to get into the institution, but now they're required to pay, you know, a ridiculous amount in order to get in. Now, considering that obviously, like you said, some of their parents are doing precarious work and they can't really afford that. So would you say then that's the biggest barrier, is that it's difficult for the parents to be able to sort of like pay all those fees and everything that's related to that?
Definitely. I think it's incredibly difficult, especially if the student or the learner does not have a bursary that they can fall back on, or a scholarship. If the parents are the one that have to pay directly from their pockets, it's very, very difficult. And I think even harder because migrant youth can't even access NASFAS, for example, because it's only available to South African citizens. So yeah, it's very difficult.
And then what are some of the things that you do as part of your program to help, you know, curb these challenges or solve these challenges? What are some of the tools and, you know, the programs that you have at Africa Unite in order to
So I think the main one that we have under movement building is the youth empowerment movement. So there is a movement that exists under Africa Unite. It's called Mars Youth Empowerment, and Mars is an acronym for migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. And this movement is made up of migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees who are in and out of school, so between the ages of about 15 to 25. And we come together, so we've actively mobilized and organized these young people to come together to try to come up with solutions to the challenges that they're faced with. But also, they do a lot of advocacy and lobbying work while living in South Africa to try to find people who are like-minded, who can actually help them with the different challenges that they are faced with. So within the movement itself, they work in different commissions. So there is a commission that's specifically addressing the issue of tackling tertiary institution education. There's a resource mobilization commission that seeks to try to fundraise for the movement, but also for the young people who are part of the movement who may be struggling financially. There's an entrepreneurship commission that seeks to avail entrepreneurial opportunities and aspects for young migrants specifically. So the kinds of programs that are in the movement look like that, where a lot of the young people also go out into different high schools in the Western Cape to spread information about the challenges of migrants, but also the opportunities that are available, because a lot of migrants who are still in school may not even know that they have to have specific documents that are required to be able to enroll, even just to write their matric exams. So they go out into these schools and they share this kinds of information to the young people, but also trying to raise awareness around their existence, just even as young people, young migrants in South Africa.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Basse. We have to take a quick break. We'll get back to you shortly. Please don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Don't forget to join in on the conversation on our social media pages. We are official_Africa Unite on Instagram, Africa_Unite_ZA on Twitter, and we are Africa Unite on Facebook. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the show. Now, if you have just joined us, we are still talking about all things migrant youth and all of the challenges that they face. And before the break, Basse took us through some of the challenges that young people living in South Africa who are migrants face when they come into South Africa. But Basse, before the break, we spoke a lot about, you know, some of the challenges relating to education, to documentation. Now, what I want to know, and I'm sure the viewers want to know this as well, personally, what are some of the challenges that, you know, young people living in South Africa face? Because obviously they have to integrate into this foreign society and they sort of have to learn and adjust. So what are some of those challenges and what have you encountered working, you know, with the Mars youth group?
I think the greatest challenge would be something somewhat like an identity crisis that they start to develop, I think, as they grow older. Because a lot of them come into South Africa while they're 4, 5, or 6, and then they grow and they integrate it into the South African society. But at the same time, the mom is probably French speaking, but they go to school and they're speaking Afrikaans. And so they start to kind of have confusion about who they are at the core, the essence of their being. So they start to now question their identity, question who they are. And I think some of the common cases that we have with the youth that we work with is that if you meet them, some you come across and you would think that they are colored, born, bred, raised in Cape Town, and then you start to speak to them and then you actually realize or find out that they were born in the DRC, only moved to Cape Town when they were 6 or 7 or 8. So those are kind of like the common challenges where they also themselves do not know where they fit. So they may consider themselves South African, but at the same time, when they now want to enroll into university, they are hit with that harsh reminder that, listen, you're actually not really all the way South African. So there's also that identity crisis that comes as a challenge. And I think with the work that they do in the movements themselves is that they try to integrate with other South African young people. So with the activities that they host and the events that they have, they seek to promote a lot of social cohesion. And so they'll have for instance, just recently we had a sports tournament, and it was all about trying to bring young people, both local and non-nationals, together to play sports, to have fun and enjoy, but all while promoting social cohesion. To say, I may not be from here, but at the end of the day, we are both young, we are both youth, we can do this thing together. So it's promoting that cohesion to say that, listen, we are all together and we are one. There's no need to separate ourselves.
And is there anything being done? Because I've also certainly met some of the Mars young people, and you would literally swear some of them are very fluent in Xhosa, for instance, and some of them very fluent in Afrikaans. And, you know, you could just see even the mannerisms and the way they are that, you know, they have been integrated into the South African community. And they would identify, you know, as you know, colored or, you know, black or Xhosa. But is there anything being done to then sort of remind them of their own culture? So, for instance, if you're from the DRC, do you have any, you know, lessons on French, or do you just learn it at home? And do you know anything about your culture?
So I think with the activities that we seek to host, we want to promote that as well, for them to know and understand themselves. So we celebrate things like Heritage Day, where they will be tasked to go and find out about their upbringing, to find out about their cultural dishes, to find out about their traditional attires that they wear in their specific cultures. So that's also an opportunity for them to learn from each other as well, where there can be that cultural exchange that happens, where even though they may be living in South Africa, they may not know, you know, what the local dishes are. And so when we have these events, it's a moment for the youth, the young people who are locals, to exchange the culture that they have with them and also learn from their different cultures as well. So I think it's a whole learning process for both parties, both nationals and non-nationals.
Great. Basse, I wish we had more time. This is certainly one of the most interesting topics we have discussed. But just to wrap up, before we go on the ad break, how do people get a hold of you? How do people, if there's a migrant maybe watching, a young migrant watching now, how can they get in touch with you in order to be involved in some of your programs?
All right, yes. So our offices are located at 6 Spin Street, Cape Town City Center. But also you can reach us on our email, which is marsyouth@africaunite.org.za. We are also contactable on social media, so you can also DM us on Instagram, Mars_empowerment.
Awesome. There you had it. We were talking about all things challenges that are faced by migrants, and all the information and details on Mars and the programs that you can join are on their social media pages. Now, after the break, we will be hearing from Marie Claire, who will be sharing her story about being a young person living in South Africa. Please stay tuned. And welcome back to the show. We are still talking about some of the struggles and the challenges that migrant young people face when they come into South Africa. And to share a story, we have Marie Claire in studio. But before we go into her story, let's find out what some of our viewers have had to say about our topic today. Please have a look. Really interesting comments from some of our viewers. Now, please do not forget to give us your thoughts as well on our social media pages. Remember, on Instagram, we are at official Africa Unite. On Twitter, we are Africa_Unite_ZA. And on Facebook, we are Africa Unite. Marie Claire, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Now, please tell us your story. Where are you from? How did you get to South Africa? And, what are some of the challenges that you have faced in that journey?
Thank you so much for having me. So, like you mentioned, my name is Marie Claire. I am originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I came when I was 5 years old. Okay. I don't have much of a memory of how it came about, but according to what my mom told me, there was war in Congo, and because my dad was part of the military, he had to leave, otherwise he was going to be killed. So in that process, since they were looking for my father, we had to also leave. So we had to use the borders of Zambia and all that long route just to get into South Africa. So I don't have much of a memory, but my mom said it was a very long journey and a difficult one at that as well.
Yeah. And then, so now fast forward, you are in South Africa growing up, and obviously we touched on this before the ad break and before having you here. What are some of then the challenges that you face being integrated into this new society? And obviously you don't have any memories before that, but when you started living in South Africa, what are some of then the challenges that you face, and how has it been being integrated into the South African community?
So already integrating into the South African community has been a bit tricky. In primary school already, we were not able to embrace ourselves, but I felt like since I started high school, I was able to embrace the fact that, I am Congolese, and I could meet other fellow migrant people who were proud of where they came from. But in primary school, that was not the case. High school has finished, now I'm getting into the adult world, and I'm realizing that getting a job is not easy, applying for tertiary education is not easy, and so forth. But it was not even information that was conveyed to me when I was still in high school or primary school, and it was not information that my parents had. So me having to navigate around all of this was actually tricky, not knowing that if you don't have an ID or so forth, you are considered an international student, meaning you pay more for university fees. Even when it comes to job applicants, they first prioritize South African citizens, and then the others follow. So which is hard, because now we have to look at what type of jobs am I going to get? Am I able to even pursue the dream that I want to? I didn't even know that as a migrant, becoming a doctor is hard in South Africa. You can study, but you'll not be allowed to practice. The same thing with lawyers. And that is not something we as the migrant community know about or are informed about. So we only learn about that the minute we finish high school. And it becomes tricky now, because already our mindset is set on, I actually want to become a doctor. But then the reality hits that it's not, you won't be able to do that thing. So it's also a disturbs a person's mindset, because now, am I actually going to make it in life? Do I now settle for being a car guard, or do I do something that's less than what I actually wanted to do in life?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm very interested though in knowing if it was up to you, how would you have preferred for things to have turned out? Would you prefer to be assimilated more into your Congolese culture, or would you know have prepared for things to have gone the same way that they have gone?
Well, initially, I'm not saying that us coming into South Africa or integrating into the community is a challenge or so forth, but the law is there and the law is supposed to protect us. But we feel like, even though we are saying that South Africa is for all who belongs into it, but we're not welcomed into it and stuff like that. And they say embrace where you come from and things like that. But it's still difficult, because as a young person, you're stuck between two. It's like you're at the border. Are you going back to Congo or South Africa? So it gets confusing, like, who do I identify myself as? When I'm with my South African friends, okay, I can bring out that colored accent, but then when I'm with my African people, you have to show, okay, you are one of us. You just need to make sure. So that can be really challenging and tricky. So,
but how do you navigate that? How do you deal with that?
that is quite a tricky question. So with me personally, like with my grandparents, I can't speak to them because they speak a different language compared to me. And it's now difficult for me to communicate, even though I want to communicate with my grandparents. Even at home, I get scolded at because my mom is like, why are you speaking to me English? I'm not your friend.
Yes.
So the minute, even in public, she says that I have to speak my mother tongue or my language from back home, because now people are going to think that we're South African, but I need to embrace. So it's always been a challenge, because even our parents, like, English is also a learning barrier for them. So they wouldn't understand certain things. And then now you have to learn English, you have to learn your home languages. In school, you're taught like other languages as well. So it also becomes a challenge as a young person, because now you're stuck between two. It gets confusing.
And what would, because I know you're also a part of Mars as well, you mentioned. So what would you say, or how would you say Mars has helped you in the whole journey? And, you know, what have you been able to take away and, you know, and been able to navigate your challenges through Mars?
Well, ever since I joined the Mars Youth Empowerment, it's been an eye-opening, because firstly, I got to learn like things that I didn't know when I was in high school, things that were not taught to me, or like, you know, sometimes news spread, but not accurate information. But through Mars, I was able to be mobilized and be capacitated to go out to my community and educate my community and also my fellow young people in terms of documentation, accessing tertiary education, and laws that are applicable to South Africans, and also how to move around it. Because I still remember I had an issue with documentation. But through Mars, I was able to tackle that issue of documentation.
Wow. And if people want to join Mars and people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that? Because I'm sure there's a lot of other young people in your position, and I think they would also like to thrive and, you know, get into some of the activities that you've done. So what would you advise to them? Firstly, let's say, what would you advise another migrant young person like you? And then secondly, how do people get a hold of you?
Well, it is. It's not that hard. So they can go on our social media platform, which is Mars Empowerment, and on Instagram. And also we have an email address, which is marsyouth@africaunite.org.za. But now the issue of mobilizing other young people to join is that initially when we tell them about the work that we do, they'll think that, oh, you're going to help with documentation, you're going to give me an ID and things like that. So it's already, they're coming with that mindset that they're going to get assisted. So we just need to move around that. But they can always come to our Africa Unite offices, which is at 6 Spin Street at Cape Town, and they could always speak to myself or Renal, and from there we just take it and find out why they would like to join Mars and just their story, and we take it from there. It isn't really that hard.
Okay, great. I'm sure they've had it. Now, any last words from you? Any advice that you want to give to any young person out there?
My advice to every young person out there is that, especially if you're from the migrant community, do not be scared to come out, or like, don't suffer from identity crisis, and be careful of the news that you hear, because nowadays with WhatsApp and links like that, make sure you get the correct information. If you're not sure, ask.
Great. There you have it. If you are not sure, you have to ask. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had an awesome time discussing some of the challenges that migrant young people face while in South Africa. Now, please do not forget to join in on the social media conversations to continue this very interesting conversation. I will see you next week. Remember, on Instagram, we are official_Africa Unite. On Twitter, we are Africa_Unite_ZA. And on Facebook, we are Africa Unite. Please stay tuned. We will see you next time.